Thank you. Was everyone here for the guy that said that we were using too much energy in Texas? You remember that guy? Okay, well, I live in Washington, D.C., but I was born and raised in Texas. And I'm constantly having to correct the locals about American history. The father of our country, George Washington, was in fact from Texas. Perhaps you've heard the story. As a teenager, he went out in the front yard and he chopped down the family mesquite tree. Shortly thereafter, his father walked out on the front porch. There was George, standing there with the hatchet in his hand. His father walked up to him and he said, now George, did you chop down the tree? And George dropped a hatchet and he hem-hawed around and he put his hands on his hips and he glanced skyward and he shuffled his feet. And finally, he looked back at his father and he said, no, sir, I didn't. And his father said, now, damn it, George, I'm going to have to move the entire family to Virginia because if you can't lie any better than that, you're not going to fit in Texas. I don't know why the locals don't remember that. Maybe it was incorrect in the books. Is this my clicker? Okay. I'm with the Academy for Healthcare Infrastructure. So we begin our venture by, we believe that if we're going to move the needle on the healthcare facilities industry, we have to do that through the owners. The architects are out there talking to each other about it, the engineers talk to each other about it, and the general contractors are talking to each other about it. But if you want to move the needle, you do that with the people that have the most to gain and the most to lose. Those are the owners. It's their money we're playing with. Truth of the matter is, if you hire really good architects and really good engineers and really good builders, and you ask them for a big, stupid, inappropriate building, and you pay your fee, they will give you a big, stupid, inappropriate building. So if we would like to put a stop to the big, stupid, inappropriate hospitals, we need to work with the owners first. So we began by surveying or actually tricking 30 of the largest healthcare systems in the United States, plus the 2 federal agencies that deal with healthcare. One is the Department of Defense operates a large healthcare system, and so does the VA. So we asked them, what's keeping you up at night? What do you think the critical issues are facing the American healthcare facilities industry? We ended up with a bunch of feedback naturally, but we narrowed that down to 5 topics. So what we do is we put together a team for each of the 5 topics. We let them argue with each other for 4 to 5 months, and then we write a white paper about it. Each team has an academic facilitator on it because I don't know if you're aware, if you've ever tried to read something written by an architect or an engineer, we are functionally illiterate. So if we want something written in the English language that actually expresses an idea, we have to get someone from academia. So we do. Each one of our teams has an academic facilitator. So let's see. We have 5 teams. I'm going to quickly show them to you. Owner organization for successful project outcomes. Greatest single issue probably is how well the owners organize themselves to make decisions. They need to make the right decision. They need to do it quickly, and they need not to change their mind down the road. So how that happens is a big deal. I asked one of the guys, he's not on this team, one of the guys that's on our advisory board is the senior vice president for facilities at what at the time was the largest single hospital project in the United States. It was Parkland Hospital in Dallas, $1.39 billion, gigantic. And so I called Walter and I said, Walter Jones was the guy in charge of all that. So I said, Walter, You got anything keeping you up at night? I thought he was going to jump at me over the phone. He said, yeah, I got a little something. He said, here it is. I report to two groups. I report to the C-suite, CEO, COO, CIO, all the C people. And I report to a board of directors. He said, we started this project 3 years ago. There's not one human being here in the C-suite that was here when we started this hospital. And he said, on the board of directors, there's not one member of the board of directors that was here when we approved this hospital. He said, as a result, my phone rings about every other day with the following question: why the hell are we building this hospital? I said, well, okay, well, armed with that information, if you had known that 3 years ago, what would you have done differently? It's pretty interesting. That's what this group is supposed to study. So if you'll see there, we have 4 co-chairs. They're all owners. And then we select appropriate subject matter experts that we think could add some horsepower to the work. So that's what we have there. Owner organization, big deal. Next topic, flexible healthcare infrastructure. The healthcare people are not certain how we will be healing sick people in 10 years, and we're not sure who's going to pay for it or how much I'll be paid. So how's that for uncertainty? Okay, so we're going to take all that uncertainty. We're going to take that, here's the good news. We're going to take that uncertainty and we're going to wrap a big, high-tech, expensive building around all of that uncertainty. And guess what? We're going to make it out of concrete and steel and glass, and it's a bitch to change. Got to figure out a way to. So there's sort of 2 competing ideas in the flexibility arena. One is I'm willing to spend 8, 9, 10% more on this building because I don't know exactly what I'm going to ask it to do in 10, 15, and 20 years. So I'm willing to spend a little more money on the infrastructure of my building to make it more flexible. The other strategy, which we run into all the time, is make my hospital out of congealed chicken fat if you can. I'm going to tear it down. The uncertainty is so great, I have no idea what I'm going to ask this building to do. Make it a metal building. Make it look like a Walmart, because we're going to tear it down and start over anyway. Okay, that's an interesting topic. Our hospitals take too long. Not only do they cost too much, they take too long to design, and they take too long to build, and they take too long to change. Project acceleration. Those are the co-chairs. Defining the next generation's focus. Well, what do we do? The problem with this process is that we often get together and we ask ourselves the very same questions over and over again. How do we do this better? How do we do it faster? How do we do it cheaper? That's pretty much what we ask ourselves every year. So just for fun, we had one group try to envision a different set of issues that should be addressed in the future. Reducing initial capital costs. Many C-suites, the business managers of these major healthcare systems are more concerned with initial capital cost than they are with flexibility or than they are with anything else. So the one group has to deal with that. All right. All of those white papers are currently under construction. The teams, I think, are pretty much done arguing with each other. And all the white papers are currently being written. And all of them will be presented in Washington on January 11th, 2016. You are all cordially invited. If anybody's interested in attending, go to nibs.org. NIBS being the National Institute of Building Sciences. Go to nibs.org and instructions will be in there. All right, I want to give you 10 minutes on another subject that I think is way cool. Here it is. Old guys like me when I first got my architectural license, the buildings were all made out of mud. That's how long it's been. So one of the things we know is that project management metrics, the way we keep track of our projects in order to produce them on time and on budget, are all historical, right? You get a little report every month and it says, this is what we did last month, this is how much money we spent last month, and we try to guess what that means. So it's the nature of the game. The data we look at is historical. Well, what we really need is some sort of a canary in the coal mine kind of thing. We need a forward-looking process metric, something that gives us a good idea that something horrible is getting ready to happen in time for us to take corrective action. That's the idea. How do you do that? How do we look into the future to determine when something horrible is coming our way on our project? Well, as it turns out, the single most critical issue is the quality and nature of the interaction and collaboration of the project team. We put together these interdisciplinary project teams, and on large projects, they're gigantic. On Terminal E in Houston, we had 246 consulting firms. I don't mean the general contractor and the subs. I'm talking about consultants who basically walk around scratching their head and frowning, glancing skyward and wondering. That's what they do for a living. We had 246 of them. So these project teams can get gigantic. And they're interdisciplinary, and here's what we know. On every project that's ever occurred, bad stuff happens. Unpredicted, bad stuff. If the team is highly collaborative, and they like each other, and they communicate, they will in fact defeat these bad external variables that are going to happen. The teams that are not highly collaborative and don't like each other can't even agree on where to go to lunch. So in the old days, if I showed up and I said, hey, we've invented a way to actually measure that and tell you about it once a month, we're going to tell you where the collaboration is occurring on your team and where it's not occurring on your team. If I told you that 10, 12 years ago, you would have said, that is just adorable, it's charming, but it's not on my radar because it's not a hard variable. I only have two hard variables, money and time. That's what I'm interested in. You got something for me about money and time, I'm listening. But this other stuff is too soft. We know now, of course, it isn't actually soft. What do you think allows your project to go over budget? It's the humans. What allows it to slip? What allows the schedule not to be made? It's the humans. So we've got to find a way to evaluate the quality and density of the collaboration. We call it process metrics, pretty cute. When we first started doing it, I thought I wanted to call it process acoustics because we're listening to the process. Mm-hmm. Big mistake. I spent my first 15 minutes explaining, no, it's not acoustics. We're not acoustical consultants. It's different. Okay, threw that out. I'm going to go through this quickly because you already know it. Large complex projects, matrix of human commitments. And most of the vast majority of those human commitments are not described in the contracts, project documentation, and team meetings. It's not in there. We need to be able to pull it out and illuminate it and look at it. Most powerful determinant of project success is the effectiveness of these human commitments. So that's what we want to look at. When I was at Rice, we did this interview of 279 AEC industry experts. And we said, okay, well, when something crummy happens on your project, what causes it? Well, if you'll notice, the number one was poor team relationships. Number two, poor communication. We don't get to schedule and budget until 4 and 5. And guess what? The reason schedule and budget don't work is because of the first three. You can't measure the quality of the human collaboration. You can't manage it. That's old news. We even knew that back when I started and the buildings were made of mud. Better, faster, cheaper. We already know that part. Okay, so here's what we do. We get the behavioral scientists involved from industrial psychology, organizational behavior, behavioral economics. Anybody here ever studied behavioral economics? Fascinating. When I was young, I was fascinated by economics and wanted to study it, except it was based on the following idea, that human economic behavior is rational. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. We buy stuff we don't need with money we don't have. What is rational about human economic behavior? At any rate, the behavioral economists are all over that issue now, and it's a much more fun undertaking than it used to be. Okay, so here's what we do. We have a web-based questionnaire that everybody on the project team fills out. It looks something like that. It takes 20 minutes. Each project team member is asked to log, and by the way, the owner of the undertaking asked them to do that. Human beings are notorious for not filling out surveys. Please, we're surveyed to death. We don't need any more surveys. I never fill them. I don't even look at my emails, but that's different. Okay, so, but the owner of the undertaking puts this in the contract with the architects, the engineers, the builders, the major subs, all the players. I want your people to fill out this little 20-minute thing once a month. You can do it on your computer. You can do it on your telephone. That's the canary in the coal mine idea. What we want to do is we want to measure circumstances that we know are going to produce undesirable outcomes. And I want to know it in time to fix it before it happens. Okay, so those are the three things. We got two things we measure: the quality of the interaction, and then we also measure things that get in the way of human interaction and human collaboration. So those are the things: density of communication, health of interpersonal relationships, effectiveness of collaboration. We define collaboration as communication is pretty simple. It's not hard to measure how much two people communicate. The collaboration is if you and I interact, and my interaction with you does not impact my work process or my work product, then collaboration has not occurred. We've been talking about baseball or the weather or something. Health of interpersonal relationships. Guess what? If I don't like Fred, I'm not talking to him, and I'm not listening to him. I don't care how smart Fred is or thinks he is. I'm not collaborating with him. Well, I want to know that. I want to know if Joe and Fred don't like each other, because we need to fix that. If we don't fix that, bad things are going to happen. All right, these variables are dynamic. Obviously, they're dependent upon contacts. They're interrelated. They're measurable. We don't even have to do anything very tricky. Oh, by the way, if you ask the behavioral scientist, I said, well, wait a minute. If I took that survey, if I took that little 20-minute survey, I'm going to lie. And they said, well, first of all, we don't call it lying. It's dissembling. I said, okay, fine. Well, I dissemble almost every day. Here's a trick that they've got. They measure response time latencies. That's how long it takes you to respond. So the computer asks you all these questions, and a lot of the questions it's not measuring, but it does measure how long it takes you to respond to that question. So it's asking me these questions, I'm responding, and then it says, do you like working with Ann? And I know, well, of course, I've got to say yes. I mean, if I say no, I'm going to get to go to a meeting, and I don't want to go to a meeting. So I know the answer is yes, and so I'm going to click yes. Well, they got a lot of research that says the longer it takes me to say yes, I enjoy working with Ann, the more likely I have dissembled. I don't want my wife to know about any of these techniques, by the way. All right, so that's what, once a month, that's what you get to look at. Those are all the people on the team. And if you'll notice, the different colors on the two axes are, those are the companies, and those are the people. And the darker the little square, the more effective the density of communication. This does not measure the quality of collaboration. These questions measure density of communication. But here's one of the things we know for everybody here that's tried to relate to another human being. When things start going well, when things stop going well, when we have a hard time, doesn't make any difference, at home, at work, any place, the first casualty is typically communication. It just slows down or stops. It's not very hard to measure that. Okay, so every month, if you'll notice, all the little. So the first thing we would do is we look up there for the little white dots. That means it's worth looking at. Does it mean something wrong? Maybe not. Maybe those people aren't expected to be interacting much yet. It's early in the project, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't. This just tells us whether that's happening or not. Okay, so every month that changes. All right, this is what a typical collaboration report would look like. The collaboration data is task specific. We want to know in which tasks the people are collaborating and on which tasks they aren't collaborating. And strangely enough, that's perfectly measurable. Health of interpersonal relationships. This is whether we like each other. This is whether we respect each other. This is where we share values and share visions. And by the way, I visited with the president of the Royal Institute of British Architects a couple of years ago. He had 85 people in his company, and we were talking about shared vision, and he said, I have 85. 5 of them are British. The rest of them, he said, are from everywhere. He said, these people don't dress the same. They've got different religions. They eat different food. They laugh at different jokes. They celebrate different holidays. He said, this group is incredibly diverse. He said, but when they come here for those 8 hours, they share a vision. We have a very cohesive vision. And we don't need to be the same to be pulling in the same direction. You already know all that stuff. What we're really interested in, the big deal to owners is fewer post-project less post-project litigation. We hate those problems. We want the problem solved in real time. We don't like the litigation thing. Okay, so that's what the report looks like once a month for the interpersonal relationships. If you'll notice, the red is not good and the green is good. So that would quickly tell me we need to, one's the client group and one is the medical equipment people. We need to go visit with them. The interpersonal relationships aren't good there. Okay, so the other thing we quickly measure are disruptors. Those are the disruptors. Confusion about roles and commitments, unshared expectations. I have expectations, but I haven't told you about it. I have expectations of you, but you don't know that. Discontinuity of teams. Oh, here's what discontinuity of teams means. Everybody here that's ever witnessed an architectural firm or an engineering firm or construction, when we get behind, what do? I go grab 5 people off these other projects, I put them on your project because I got to knock it out. And I'm going to do the same thing on your project. I'm going to get behind someplace else. I'm going to take those people. I'm going to shove people around. It's this disruptive, short-term shuffling of human beings I want to know about. If I'm an owner, I want to know when you do that to me, because mischief occurs when we do that. That's what the monthly report looks like on that issue. When we first get started, we look at process expectations, we look at project expectations, we look at an analysis of all that. Your little monthly report says these are the actionable items, these are the trends to watch, this is where things are going fine. We can do that once a month. Project team integration is a huge issue. All right. That's it.
Very good.
If anybody's interested in attending the January event, please go to nibs.org and sign up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Do we have one or two questions for Joe on his presentation? No. All right, then I have one actually, Joe. Don't go away. I'm very curious. What's the reaction? How are the owners receiving this? How is this project, the integration, measurements, and metrics piece going?
Well, we are making this up as we go along. So what we have to do with a new venture like this is find some early adopters. Those are people who have not been so abused by the system that they're afraid of us. They let us practice on them. And typically they do it this way. They said, you know what you're doing? I mean, that's fascinating. I'm going to let you practice on us. But if you induce psychic collapse on any of my team members, I'm going to sue you. So that's the way we started. It's going fine. We'll figure this out.
Excellent.
I have a question.
Great. Please.
So you're measuring about once a month. Have you felt that might be too long to wait? You need a higher temporal density of measurement?
That's an excellent question, and the answer is there will be times when you would want to do it more than once a month, and there would be times when you wouldn't survey the entire team, just 2 or 3 parts of it that you think perhaps are dysfunctional. So we would vary who we survey, and we would also vary the frequency depending on what it looks like at the time. I got interested in this topic because every one of my former wives took me to therapy where they asked the same kinds of questions.
One of the issues you might face, if you increase the frequency it becomes too high, then you're going to get response biases. Basically, if I answered the question last week, just how I answered last week is going to affect how I'm answering this week.
You're exactly right.
So there's ways around it. I don't know if you're familiar with the implicit attitude test. So you're testing someone's attitude about another person potentially without them knowing. Just put it on your radar.
No, I mean, those are completely relevant issues.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Good exchange. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to invite our next panel members to start moving forward.